Gale St. John come out. And one of the more interesting thing about Gale is how she spells her name. Gale, like a hurricane, like a force. And that is certainly what this lady is like. I like to say that her psychic powers help her to find needles in haystacks, y'all. But I got to tell you, really, we have more than one haystack involved here. What she does is she locates which haystack out of dozens, hundreds, thousands, and then she finds the needle. And she does not do it alone. Her faithful canine companions are invaluable once she gets them pointed in the right direction. So this is the special thing about Gale St. John. She doesn't simply possess psychic powers in spades, which she does, but she also possesses credentials to handle search dogs effectively. And in fact, she's part of an Indiana search team that actually looks for various, for example, bodies or accident victims, what have you. And she is also certified as a volunteer canine handler. And is quite interesting. She will certainly share some of her stories with us tonight. Her dogs are nationally credentialed animals, so they are in effect quite expert themselves in locating lost things, locating hidden things, things that have disappeared, things that obviously are valuable and need to come home. So tonight, once we get Gale on, she'll explain to us for her various travels across the globe and how on earth she does this amazing thing. Because I got to tell you, folks, most psychic detectives, what they do is they call the police and ask to be involved in the investigation. Let me help. Let me help. Gale St. John actually goes to find the body first, and then she calls the police to come in and conduct their investigation. She has a website, obviously. You can find her at psychicgalestjohn.com. And as I've mentioned, she spells her name as Gale and not Gail. So she's Gale St. John. Very interesting lady. And she also is an author of many books. Well, one in particular that is quite interesting. We'll be talking about that tonight. That book actually details a lot of her stories as well. So if you're interested in all things criminological, if you're interested in mysteries, for example, then tonight should be a pretty good show. And we are definitely working on getting her out here now. And again, Gale St. John. Hello, Gale. Are you with us yet? We're trying to establish.
I am.
Ah, hi. Well, I suppose you heard some of my introduction then.
I did. I got a chance to listen to it. It always sounds a little strange to me.
Well, we're definitely very happy to have you here tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. So would you mind describing your procedure a little bit? Like, for example, how do you get started on a case? Are you called out, or do you get an urge, or how does it happen? How does it begin?
Well, it can be all of the above. I mean, really, it can. There are some where it was just so strong. It was like one of those things where you can't resist. It's like dangling the candy in front of the kid. Yeah. Those are the ones you just go, I got to go. So it's sort of like, I already know where, so let's just get this over with.
Yeah.
And then there's ones where, and I would say most of the time, I will go to most of the time, police or, state attorneys are calling me, and I go and, work on the cases. I have some families that'll call, but when families call, I have to follow procedures and protocol, which if I agree to work with the family, it doesn't really mean that it's okay. So I have to have the family kind of be the go-between and get a hold of the police, the detective that's working on their missing persons case, and say, are you okay? This is who she is. This is what she does. But she's credentialed in search work. The dogs are credentialed, and we're at a standstill with our missing loved ones. Can we please get an okay from you? So I just can't butt in. I can't just jump in.
Right. Right.
You like to, but listen, I have protocol. It has to be followed.
Well, you've not done this just in America. You've also been called outside the country to help with missing people as well. So you've obviously done this for several decades, and you've had many interesting cases in many interesting places. And I know it's going to be difficult what I'm going to ask you to do here, but essentially I'm curious if you can narrow down a couple of the more memorable cases that you've investigated and handled.
Yeah, I've worked over 1,000, well over 1,000 cases. But there's a few that stand out in my mind. And I got to say, one case was in Japan. And I found it so interesting. You have several issues going on, one with language barrier, as well as culture barriers. Okay? So there's certain things you have to be very careful with when you speak of them. In our country, to be honest, most people heard, and I'm not saying it's not about caring about it, but if you said the word, someone was raped or a child was molested, we're a very open country, and we don't have issues with saying, listen, we need to take care of this problem. It's different. It's different there in Japan. Those are things that are never put on the news, never put out, never talked about.
So you have to be
as
very tactful.
As that sounds, very, very, very hush.
Sure. I would imagine.
I think most people would go, what? Really? It's true. It's very true.
So you've traveled to Japan to hunt for the missing as well. Any other interesting things?
I've been to Japan 3 times hunting for different people. They've actually paid for me to go there and find them. So it's, like I said, cultural differences. You do begin to understand the language barrier. It's really not a barrier.
Did you find the police to be hostile over there or trying to block your work?
Not really. Surprisingly, not really. They had given up and were open to anything at this point, and the mother of the one missing girl was open to it. Her name was, I can mention it, just I'll give the first name. Her name was Yayoi. And so she asked me to, help, and then, of course, the Asahi TV got involved and went to the police and said, can we, bring her here? And so I ended up in Japan, and like I said, there was a lot of language barriers. But I found that, on the other side, it's not a problem, because if they say something to me, I can get the gist of it by listening to my guides. And I ended up with an interpreter later, but I'd always answer the question of the, people, talking to me before the interpreter said what they said. She goes, why do you keep doing that? I said, well, was my answer correct? She goes, well, yes. I went, okay, well, all right. You're here in case I don't get it.
Right. It seems like a translator would be unnecessary when you're dealing with the spirit world and, where things might be a little multilingual over there. But how did that case resolve?
I found, in that case, with Yayoi, I did locate her. So, it was sad. I did find her deceased.
You did find... Now, this was a very cold case. As you said, the Japanese authorities had given up on this.
Right. So, it was sad, and it was hard to see the mother.
Sure.
So sad. And I hugged her, and we both cried. And cried. And, it doesn't have to be someone I know. The feelings are there, and if you're any bit of a, you don't even have to be psychic or sensitive in any way to feel that pain of someone else's, that loss.
Well,
so it's about compassion, and you really do have to have a lot of compassion to do this. And there's times when it just really hurts.
May I ask, what sort of, do you establish some sort of a relationship with the deceased or with the missing person? Is this possible? Or is that sort of brokered by your spirit guides? Are they the ones directing you?
You know, it's both ways. I mean, to be honest with you, it's both ways. Sometimes I'll hear more from guides repeating things to me, and sometimes I have the victim come direct. And to be honest with you, I like it when the victim comes direct because they're very adamant about where they are, what's happened to them, and it goes so smoothly.
Do you think there's a relationship between the manner in which the victim went missing and died and the enthusiasm that their spirit has? For example, if someone runs away and they encounter a bad fortune, is it possible that maybe their spirit is still wanting to stay hidden someplace, or perhaps in other words, I guess I'm asking if there could be some, if you have any, I guess, an educated guess as to why certain spirits are more vocal and why others, seem to be more shy.
I think so. I mean, I really, in one case I had that really stands out was a case in Arizona, and this is where when I was doing the Larry King show years ago, he said that I was the first one to actually save a life. Well, it wasn't hard to save a life from somebody else being killed because this girl's roommate, they were best friends, loved each other dearly, like sisters. She was so clear to me and so full of energy, it wasn't hard to figure out that the roommate was the next victim. She made it extremely clear. I made it extremely clear to the police detective working the case. He was able to prevent her from going out on a date. She was going out on a date the next day with this guy.
My goodness gracious, that is kind of chilling, if you ask me. It seems to me as if there's been a long history of the police at least being friendly to psychics. It's almost as if they're very open-minded. I wanted to ask you, what's your relationship usually like with other emergency workers?
It goes. You do get your kind of hostile ones at times that don't want you there.
Right.
But generally, if I'm called out, it's a welcome thing. I mean, they're happy, and some may be skeptic. I do have some walk right up to me and go, listen, I'm 100% skeptical. And generally my answer back to them is, I am too.
That's excellent.
When I find them, then I'm going to believe myself.
I think that's a great attitude.
It's not 100% science, so I'm skeptical too. I'm hearing all these things I'm following what I'm told.
So this actually raises another question for me. I'm very curious about what sort of sensory apparatus guides you. Is this an olfactory thing? Do you pick up smells, or is it purely visual or auditory? Can you describe the sensory
I'm laughing
field?
because it's like all of them, but every case is different. But I will say, when you say pick up smells, it's not a real smell, okay? I mean, if I'm smelling somebody that's 10 miles from me, it's I might be picking up a perfume they wore, and it may lead me closer to them. I also use people's electrical force that we all have. It's like our DNA. I always tell people that's your thumbprint DNA, because that electrical force that you leave behind, because we are electric, is like a cell phone wave going through the air. Okay, you can't see your cell phone wave. You can't see all these waves going through the air, and some people can't feel it. But you can pick up people the same way that a cell phone is picking up another cell phone or another phone.
Sure.
You can feel that, and once you can find that particular vibration, just like a bloodhound would find that particular person's scent on the ground, I will search for that person's particular signature electrical force. And I will keep following it. And if I lose the trail, and I do, I'll move a little bit more, to the left, to the right, and seeing what street did they go down, where did they go, and keep following.
And for everybody listening, I just want to emphasize again, you can visit Gale St. John at her website, Psychic Gale St. John. You can pick up her book there, Missing and Presumed Dead. I mean, if you like, for example, Investigation Discovery Channel, then you're going to love to read this book, I tell you. So anyway, moving on, Gale, I wanted to mention your book so that people would know that you have that out there in case they are hungry for more after this show, which I guarantee that they will be. I mean, if you're into this sort of stuff, then it's just highly fascinating. Well, one thing I definitely want to ask you is, do you ever pick up any details on offenders? You talked some about, helping that one girl's roommate avoid almost a certain tragedy there. But do you ever pick up any other detail about offenders, for example? I'm curious about that. Or is it purely victim-driven?
And on that particular case where the roommate, her life was saved, that particular guy, they told me they had picked up the right guy. And I said, no, you haven't. You do not have this guy. He works at, and I named a place. And the police ended up going there and questioning him. But I said, when you're questioning him, I said, this guy is going to try to hurt you, and he's going to be very calm, cool, collected. You're never going to expect this. And the detective said, really? I mean, that was that kind of really kind of sound,
Yeah, not taking you seriously? Or
I was like, well, just heed this warning.
Yeah.
Because I'm really picking up on this vibration, and he goes, we don't even know if we have the right. You're telling us this guy works, this place. He goes, and so the roommate is saying that's the guy she was going to go on a date with. He goes, well, we don't have any proof. I went, just be careful, and I said, he's actually going to admit to what he did. He did admit that he was going to kill a roommate. He did admit to killing her friend. And then all of a sudden, without warning, he swung a punch at the detective and put his fist right through the wall.
Oh, okay. And so I'm sure you made a believer out of that detective.
Oh, he called me up and said, it was sort of like the person you joke about who saw a ghost. He was like,
wow.
I just got to tell you what happened. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, certain people, when they're confronted of proof of stuff like this, it can unhinge them. Have you ever had any sort of response like that from, an uber rational or very materialistic sort of police officer, or, someone who just can't believe that, you ever?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
oh, wow.
Absolutely. That was a case I actually worked in Ohio, and I was actually standing in front of the body, so I had to make the call, and he got there, and he was like totally in disbelief, and then he got upset and turned it around and said, I'm going to have to take you in because you might be the killer.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God. I was wondering about
talk
that.
About coming unhinged. That's coming unhinged. I didn't even know the guy.
Yeah, well, also I have to put myself in the police's perspective, and, they obviously can't take a case to court and cite you as evidence because, the defense attorney would just probably, have a field day with that. So does that factor into your considerations as you're hunting for this or that victim?
Well, it depends. If I'm out alone, and I find a body and I don't have dogs with me, there's an issue. I mean,
sure.
Obviously I can't come in and testify. I can testify physically to what I just found and saw here, but I can't, of course, bring anything psychic into it. Now, here's where the legal end goes, and this is what you have to be so careful with. One, I can't search a property without permission because I am credentialed with my dogs. I have to have proper permission or it won't hold up in court if I find something.
Understood.
So this is a sticky situation. You have to really be careful. You can say that word psychic all you want, but then you have to turn around and you have to go the legal end with the dogs because they're kind of don't in one way work together.
And rightly so.
So I have to be very careful.
Sure, and rightly so. We're talking about someone's entire life here, So obviously.
Well, if I go in, I mean, if you think about this, you have a good argument, and it works in many cases where evidence is thrown out, including a body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All evidence or whatever was found can be thrown out. If I was there searching without permission, for one thing, the dogs their credentials are no good unless a police officer is present. Now, once there is if there's a police officer present at the time that my dogs make the find, then I now have to go to court and testify along with that police officer, and I have to produce my entire last year of training records. All my certifications, along with what happened step by step by step by step. Full report, basically written in military form and times and everything. It has to be extremely technical for the courts.
That's a consideration, I think, of psychic detective work that a lot of us really don't think about. The legalistic end of it.
It is. It really isn't. But I'm going to tell you something. People always say to me, "Well, why don't you just go out and do the search, or do this, or do that, or you just let your dogs go?" No. You don't just let your dogs go and then make the find. You are 50% of this team. So
sure.
You study a lot about the wind, humidity, barometric pressures, probability of detection during certain times of the day.
So
there's a lot to learn. This is not something you step into lightly. This is a full-blown commitment.
Yeah, it's not just, in other words, the psychic part is just as important also as the detective part. So you have to have your skills of detection, just like any other investigator, constable, police officer, etc. Those have to be up to par as well, don't they?
Right. And you have to know you have to know the legal end of things. You have to know about, people say, oh, wind. Okay, the wind's blowing this way, the wind's blowing that way. Well, it's not just quite that way. You're talking about humidity, barometric pressure. You're talking about all these conditions. What does it cause? Does it cause a chimney effect? Does it cause this? Does it cause that? How, I can't help my dogs. We can get close, and then my dogs might be doing a certain body language, and I'm going to say, okay, my victim that I'm looking for has got to be up the hill a quarter mile.
Amazing.
Because the way the wind is, the barometric pressure, all these conditions, my dog is down here reacting, but finding nothing. That tells me it's up there. So there's a lot of conditions can create certain things.
Well, we'll definitely
it's a lot of study.
I will certainly have a lot of questions to ask about your dogs in the second half of the interview once we get beyond the commercial. Because like you said, you're only 50% of the equation, and they help out a lot. So we have a lot to ask about those. But before we do get to that break, whenever it comes, I would just sort of like to talk about maybe some high-profile cases that you've touched upon, or perhaps have been involved with, or just found yourself sort of involved in. I know there's a famous video on YouTube where you, right? You know what I'm going to ask, right? I'll just let you take it from here.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm going to ask?
The
right?
Anthony case. In
Absolutely.
Florida.
We're very curious about that. Can you talk about that experience?
I can.
Awesome.
Originally I do what they call a blind drive on every case. If I go out and work, I do I've coined the phrase blind drive, which is where I'm picking up that signature or that vibration, and I start where the last known place was of the person when they were alive, if we know this. When I began that search, I started at the Anthony house, and I drove right straight to the body. My problem was, and my dilemma, is I have to follow the law. It doesn't matter the psychic end, I have to follow the law.
Right.
And I couldn't cross over. So I did call on that case, and let them know that I was 100% sure. I was seeing the bag. I also know when Kronk went by because we waved at him. So anybody that knows about the case, that is how all that happened, which the public really never knew the whole case. Okay, it wasn't talked about. But while I was on the phone, that was one of those irritating moments as a psychic medium where I was just so frustrated because they go, "Are you that dumb psychic from Ohio? You can go home."
I see. So they had to wait for a utility worker to find the body instead, and then.
Well, he had seen us standing there, so he knew right where it was. I mean, we were out there with cadaver dogs, but we could not go onto that land.
Man, it's such a sad and frustrating case.
Well, yeah, because there would have been forensic evidence left on August 11th when we made the location of the body.
Right.
We could not get anybody out. I even went to Texas EquiSearch and asked them to please go there, and they said they couldn't. And they had already they claimed that they had searched the one area. I said, but you did not search this area, and you need to come back. And I just got to the point where I was so frustrated over it because of the legal end of it. I spoke to Nancy Grace's field producer, and she said, "You have the video?" I went, "Yes." She goes, "Are you willing to hand it over?" I went, "At this point, of course. I'm getting nowhere."
Yeah.
And I let them have it. And, you know, of course, we know that by December 11th, how many months is that? You know, do the math.
Sure.
So sad because we didn't get a conviction. I'll stand by what I say. If I had been on the jury, I could not have convicted her because I didn't have 100% proof, even though I know what happened.
Yeah,
you know,
I think
so it's frustrating. August 11th, we would have got incriminating evidence.
Sure. Yeah, and the poor little girl would have been in better condition for the medical examiner up there. Perhaps.
Absolutely.
Oh man, that's
and
that
at
must
this time,
have been
I'm actually going to go back to school for forensic entomology.
Whoa! Not satisfied with achieving so much, you're going to push for more. That's outstanding. Forensic. Can you tell us what that is?
I am like saying, you know what? If I get ticked off, I go back to school.
Go back to school. Awesome. Well, can you tell us? That sounds fancy. What is that?
Well, forensic entomology is actually just I'll dumb it down. It's about the bugs and larvae that are on a body that tell you how long that body's been there. It tells you the whole story. Like bugs enter the cavities first, and larvae will be in certain stages, but all these things will be in certain stages depending how long the body's been there. And that'll tell you the whole story. It'll even tell you where the injuries were, because they'll get in those first.
That's amazing. That's
so forensic entomology is just an amazing subject. I mean, these are things that they use, with like on CSI and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that makes sense to me because you've been doing this for so long. It's natural to want to branch out into other areas of criminology and of investigations as well. But also, I was kind of curious too, and I know you probably can't go into details in terms of names or whatever, but if you could tell us generally, have you ever had a problem with family members? Do they ever interfere in the investigation harmfully?
I don't know that I want to call it interfering, as I did have one family who kind of got really upset because, I think it came down to more or less they couldn't deal with the fact that their child was gone, had been deceased, and so they really were having a hard time with this. And I certainly understand it, but they became enraged when one of my dogs actually indicated somewhere, which told me there were body fluids there, and they were enraged about it. And I had done a radio show and I kept everything illegal. You know what I mean? I kept it legal.
Right.
And didn't say, anything that hadn't been announced to the public. But they just weren't dealing with it. So I can't blame them in that way. I totally understand the pain.
Sure. I mean, it's a high the emotions are running high, and I would imagine that it could be, just a typical, I guess, or not so typical, but just a job hazard, a natural side effect of what it is that you do.
Right. Most of the families, I can honestly tell you, have been wonderful, and I've sat and shed many tears, and some have become very dear friends of mine.
Well, Gale, we're going to take a quick 1-minute commercial break, and we're going to be right back. Just want to remind everyone you can find Gale at psychicgalestjohn.com. And remember, she's a Gale like a hurricane, not a Gail. And by all means, you're going to want to pick up her book, Missing and Presumed Dead. That's a gotta read. Be right back in 60 seconds.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
Welcome back to the Psychic Viewpoint with Gale St. John. Gale, we were just talking about some of your investigations and your methods in investigating. Let's talk about your dogs, because they are definitely a very important part of your team. You're psychic, but your dogs also have their own powers. How do they aid your psychism?
Well, there's several ways. One, we're very in tune with each other. So could I almost say they're psychic? Sure. Don't you feel that with your dogs? I mean, I ask people all the time, don't you feel in tune with your animals? I really work closely with them in a way of, I really feel what they're thinking, and they feel what I'm thinking. So I have to be careful that I don't, they don't feed off of something. I sometimes actually have to block things out, because I don't want my dogs to pick up on emotions or different things.
I was going to ask you about that. Do they get depressed and sad?
They can, yeah. They can.
Sure, because dogs love human
I try
beings.
to keep things very happy, very light for them. And, if I get frustrated, that goes right to them. And I don't want to send that message to them. Sometimes we work hours and hours and acres and acres and hundreds of acres. It gets tiring and it wears on everybody. But I try keeping them very happy, lighthearted. We'll take breaks. We'll sit down, get water, and do things like that.
They look for humans. They're good at finding humans. Have you ever considered about taking your team and finding contraband?
Well, that's a police thing. In all reality, looking for all that stuff is most of your police officers and police departments have those types of dogs. What most of them don't have is a dog that does HRD, and HRD means human remains detection. So, and they also don't have dogs that find live humans. Now, they have dogs that will go out and track down someone who's, done a crime, and they'll bring the dog out to track them. But that's a whole different thing. When my live find dog goes out, she's looking for someone who's lost, who is alive. So I have one dog that does live finds, I have 2 dogs that do human remains detection.
This is actually
and I'm training my 4th.
This is a great opportunity because, so far we've talked about the unfortunate, the lost, the doomed, the people who've been victimized. Let's be a little bit more optimistic, because sometimes you locate the living, don't you?
Absolutely. And my one female, her name is Kendall. She trains on what we call rubble piles, and we have simulated disasters. Let's say a tornado hits an area. We have to train in those conditions of houses that have been destroyed and, 2, 3-story buildings that have collapsed. So we have rubble we have to actually climb up on with our safety gear. We'll be wearing 40-some pounds of gear on us and climbing. And then anybody goes to my website, they'll see me with some of my gear on.
Yeah, that's the only thing that's missing from your gear is the word psychic on the back of your that would just be awesome. On the back of your emergency jacket.
But
right? How the cops have,
but you'll see that, and they're climbing around. And it's another one of those things we train for, and we're actually part of a district task force in my state, which works with FEMA and Homeland Security. So we are called out and would be called out for any of the disasters that happen, like 911, all those different things. We will be called out for those disasters. And this is what my live dog trained for. So say somebody's buried in the rubble, and they can't call out, but they're alive. So these dogs will climb all over this dangerous collapsed buildings and locate people that are alive.
Just putting myself in that situation for 5 seconds, fills me with a bunch of gratitude to the dog, because it's a frightening scenario to be helpless and basically, feeling, hey, I'm not going to make it out of this one. And so to have the dogs come through and yourself come through at the last minute for a rescue, that certainly has to be a wonderful feeling. But you mentioned a student of yours, and this makes me curious. Because I'm curious about the up-and-coming crop, the new crop of psychic investigators. Earlier you described your method as partly tracing out a sort of an electromagnetic signature. And so this is very scientific. It seems like something that could be replicated. Can you tell us a little bit about your instructing and your teaching and, about the new generation of psychic investigators that you're helping to shape?
And if anybody watched The Blind Drive, they will see one of my students, Travis Sanders, as I'm teaching him. Yes, we do it.
I do remember seeing that.
I'm a very hands-on teacher. And I said, very good, very good. And you'll see me come back and say, okay, now if I go this way, what are you feeling? And he's like, I got it. I'm feeling it. And that's the idea. I like to take students right out on a case. But I can also take students out when we hide somebody. Because people can find live people too. You don't need a dog always. So if you take and hide somebody, I take a student after they've been out there for a couple hours. I tell them, take a book. You're going to need to read for a while. The vibration is strong now, just like the scent for a dog. The longer they've been out there, the vibration is stronger, and the longer they've been out there, the scent is stronger for a dog. So if we're not using a dog, I still want them to be out there for a couple hours, and then I begin by telling them, shut your eyes. And I'm going to run into a tree. No, you're not. Believe me, trust yourself. Trust yourself. You won't run into a tree. Put your hand out. You're not feeling so that you physically hit the tree. You will feel the vibration changes as you walk. Trees feel different than concrete, than a person. Begin to open yourself up to feeling those vibrations and those waves.
Sure.
That's key to learning.
So what we're talking about is like an interference to my force field. Something that's impinging upon my force field, and I detect a presence there. Oh, there's a presence there, and I have to be careful around that presence. I have to take note of that presence so that I don't bust my glasses or break my nose or miss this hidden Victim.
We're a very physical people, so sometimes we have a hard time. And I tell students, stop looking with your eyes. Those aren't going to help you.
Yeah, the
You're
detectives
going
have
to
those already.
Look with what's inside you. What is given to you? Your ability, use it. Really hone those skills. So, like I said, I take the students out and actually do these things. That's the only way you really learn. And that's when you begin to trust yourself and know that you've walked up to a tree and you can go, oh, what a feeling this gives off. Wow. Just running my hand 6 inches from it, I feel so different. And now I move to the next tree. It's similar, but different. That's, can be because it's a different kind of tree.
Huh.
And all things have different vibrations. When you become more and more sensitive to it, you can put a blindfold on and walk through woods. You'll be fine. You'll find the person.
What do you look for in a student?
The first thing I always look for is not the student who brags about how good they are. I look for the student who has an eagerness and desire to open themselves up to everything. Let nothing hold them back. And ego certainly becomes a problem and doesn't mix with this work.
So it's not for everybody.
No, absolutely not. I've come across some very egotistical people, and I'll honestly tell you their abilities are good, but when that ego steps in, it's like a complete conflict, and it becomes their actual tool that blocks them.
What would you say to those listening who may feel as if they're psychic? Those listening who get very good intuitions, but never listen to them because they are not psychic. They maybe don't give their intuition enough credit. What can you say to those folks who may feel as if they don't have any aptitude for increasing their psychism?
I tell people every day we're all born with an ability. Sure. Just like animals, we are animals. Animals know when they're becoming prey. They know when to run. They know when someone's watching them. They know all these things. So do we. We just have to tune in. Now, not everybody is a mathematician. I'm terrible at math, okay? But there are some people who are mathematicians, okay? So all of us aren't going to have the same degree of ability. Right, that's for sure. Take the skills that you do have and work with them. Listen to your intuition, your feelings. These things will never steer you wrong if you use them in your everyday life. They're there to help you to get through life.
It is a very strange and helpful calculus indeed for us. But I want to ask you this. If you think of offenders versus victims, what do you think about the notion that maybe the victim did not listen to their own psychic powers or psychic feelings or spirit guides, whereas the offender perhaps did follow a psychic instinct? What do you think about that notion? Does that feel like nonsense maybe, or does it feel like maybe it could be
because I know people that have been in this situation, or different situations. They lived through it, but they were lucky to have lived through it. But, I will say that, yourself, you ever sat somewhere and knew somebody was staring at you?
I sure have.
And you work with it, and then others will say, oh, that's nonsense. I'm just being, silly. Always follow those instincts. And if they do, sometimes these people would still be alive. Now, do I say that, say the murderer has an ability? Listen, it just doesn't say that only somebody that's good can have this ability. Mm-hmm. So, by the same token, that person can find their victim a lot easier.
Right.
By saying, "Ooh, this person is going to be the right victim," because they do not listen to their inner self.
Right.
I feel like I can really wrap them around my finger and get them where I want them.
And meanwhile, the offender is accustomed to paying very close attention to his instincts and the gurglings of his intuition. He knows to trust his instincts, doesn't he? That's very scary.
And this is where I talk about serial killers. They're often very in tune, and it's a shame. They're very in tune, and they use their ability the wrong way.
For people to study under those experienced and who know, such as yourself, those who have a very, very impressive curriculum vitae, but who are also very humble and dedicated to service to humanity. Because I tell you, folks, Gale St. John has been climbing over all sorts of inhospitable terrain. She's filled people's families' lives with closure and relief, and it's not like she lives in Miami Beach or a posh mansion. Gale St. John has not exploited this need. She's done a lot of good, and it's a service to humanity. It's a service to humanity. So as far as I'm concerned, it's people like Gale St. people like yourself, Gale. I don't mean to sit here and talk about you like you don't exist, like you're not here. It's people like yourself, I think, who are I don't even want to say obligated, but we are obligated to entrust our education to people such as yourself. You're one of the trustworthy shepherds in psychism. Now, I also wanted to ask you, Gale, and again, I understand you might not be at liberty to give revealing details, and I certainly don't want you to get yourself in any legal hot water, but is there any particular victim or case that maybe has stuck with you over the years that you just can't shake off?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And I apologize. I should ask your permission if it's okay, if you don't mind speaking about that as well. I hate to...
Yeah, it just frustrates me. There was a case where I found a body. I know what happened. Okay, I named names. I know what happened. And there's no way even the family said, how could you know those names? Well, it's, to me, that's a dumb question. To them, they're like, wow. But I had the victim tell me these things. But what frustrated me the most is it was a rushed autopsy. A lot of mistakes were made. And what I'll do, not meaning to sound gruesome, but, autopsies are supposed to be clearing what, and telling us how this person died. Well, they said he died from an overdose. He was a drug addict, but he had an overdose of Tylenol in his system. That doesn't go with smoking crack. So right. They claimed that he had committed suicide, but when they found the body and when they got there, when they did the initial examination, they found a tube shoved down his throat and down through the esophagus. Now, I, don't mean this in a joking way, and I do. When's the last time you contemplated suicide and shoved a tube down your throat so you could dump the pills in?
No way.
Well, you and I say no way. And the coroner put this through as a suicide. I was enraged. The family was enraged. They fought this for 3 years, and finally they removed it and said, unknown, undetermined. The death was unknown, undetermined.
It's difficult to intubate yourself. There's a gag reflex.
Yeah, it wasn't happening, and that isn't what happened. And after I found his body, 2 days later, he kept coming to me and saying, my keys are there. Go to the certain place. My keys are there, and my wallet are there. And then look for the car tracks. And so the family was able to go down there, find the keys, his wallet. Now, the police had done a clean sweep, they said.
Let me ask you this. And,
do you understand the frustration there?
I've asked about conflict with the police. I've asked about conflict with the families, and this is probably the most difficult one of all. Do you ever, because you're the one talking to spirits, perhaps do you ever feel they hold you accountable for things? Do you ever feel like they might be getting angry at you?
Yeah, I do sometimes. I mean, and I know they don't mean it that way, but it's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for them. You know, like in this case, he did not kill himself. Yeah. Witnesses told from it was like up on a hill, there was a trailer park. Witnesses told of a car that had pulled down there, had the trunk open the day before, and threw something into the creek. It was his body.
Oh my God. That's.
But yet they're saying it's suicide. Well, so he jumped in a trunk, jumped out of a trunk, shoved a tube. You know, it's that moment when you just want to rip your hair out and go, seriously.
Well, I'll tell you what, Gale, we're coming down to the short hairs here. I want to ask you a quick question. How do you protect yourself, your emotions, and your psyche?
I do a lot of meditation. I have to sit down and just absorb what happened, meditate, and then sometimes after I find the body, I'll sleep literally 2 to 3 days.
Well, you know what? You've been doing this for 30 years, and now I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you've expressed an interest to expand, go into forensic etymology, etc., and you are now accepting clients. Am I right about that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I want a reading with you. I have a loved one who's passed. I'm desperate to contact that loved one. How do I get a hold of you to make that happen?
Well, you can email me at k9search@ymail.com, or you can call my number and leave a message. Generally, you will have to leave a message because of my training is so lengthy, but you can call 419-491-7283. Leave me a message. I do return calls.
Okay, and your email address, is that the letter K and the number 9, or spelled out K9?
Yep, the letter K and then the number 9, and then search.
K9 search at
ymail.com.
Very good, very good. Well, Gale, I can't thank you enough for coming here tonight and enlightening us with your knowledge and your stories. I want to remind everyone, please find Gale St. John at psychicgalestjohn.com. And again, that's Gale like the storm, Gale, and not Gail or Gayle and any other permutation thereof of that beautiful name, but psychic, Gale, St.John.com. Pick up her book, Missing and Presumed Dead. You will certainly be glad you did. Perfect summer reading, especially.
And that is, there is another book actually called, I'm sorry to interrupt you, there's another book called Missing and Presumed Dead. But if you look for Missing and Presumed Dead, a psychic search for justice, or you can just put on, if you're doing Amazon, just put in Gale St. John and my book will pop up.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And there is a Kindle edition.
All right, well, Gale, I really do appreciate you coming on, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers. Get access. Psychic access. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.